clandestine service from 2005 to 2007. Served as a former deputy director. Here to talk about the process of intelligence gathering. Mr. Sano, thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Coming up, the House of Representatives will meet today. It'll meet in just a few moments for morning hour. That will be at 10 o'clock. 12 o'clock for legislative business. First votes expected about 1:30. We go to the House of Representatives.
The House will be in order. The Chair lays before the House a communication from the Speaker.
The Speaker's Rooms, Washington, D.C., September 10, 2013. I hereby appoint the Honorable Elena Ross Layton to act as Speaker Pro Tempore on this day. Signed, John A. Boehner, Speaker of the House of Representatives.
Pursuant to the order of the House of January 3, 2013, the Chair will now recognize members from lists submitted by the majority and minority leaders for morning hour debate. The Chair will alternate recognition between the parties, with each party limited to 1 hour and each member other than the majority and minority leaders and the minority whip limited to 5 minutes each, but in no event shall debate continue beyond 11:50 a.m. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. BLUMENAUER, for 5 minutes.
Congress returns to Washington this week after a month connecting with people at home, hopefully with a little time with family and friends. Some think our overwhelming agenda was made nearly impossible with the Syrian question, which no one expected when we recessed. Somewhat ironic, even though 100,000 Syrians have been killed and 2 million refugees are flooding into neighboring countries. We face a looming budget showdown and a debt ceiling crisis. While we have futile votes to defund Obamacare, the rest of the country is in the midst of a profound change in health care, one of the most profound in half a century. The health care reform train has left the station. What if we took a break from sabotaging Obamacare and creating a debt ceiling crisis to do our job as representatives of the people and as leaders? What are we for? We might start with Syria. I have deep reservations about the use for force, but as one of the people who called upon the President to involve Congress in this decision, I think most of us have an obligation to at least hear him out. Let's work to refine the Russian proposal, which appears to have had some American origins. What about the 2 million refugees who need our help, to say nothing of their host countries? Let's seize upon some of the promising signs out of Iran from their new leadership to make progress both in Syria and with the Iranian nuclear question. Domestically, let's spend our time rebuilding and renewing America, not just lamenting the poor shape of our infrastructure, but working together to support the vision and the resources to rebuild and renew the country and put Americans back to work. Internationally, I see my good friend and colleague, Congressman Ted Poe, on the floor. Why don't we zero in on the efforts with our International Water for the World legislation to help deal with sanitation and safe drinking water for poor people around the globe? Think about those 200 million women, 200 million hours women will spend in sub-Saharan Africa gathering water today, time that they won't spend in school or working for their families. Let's use the fall to identify and move forward on the vast array of things where we actually agree, we can work together, and they won't cost very much. America will be the better for it, and so will Congress.
Gentleman yields back. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. McClintock, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Russia's diplomatic intervention in the Syrian crisis is indeed welcome news. But whether it is real or illusory, the President needs to step back from the dangerous precipice that he has brought us to. Certainly he's made his case for war with Syria very clearly, that the United States must punish the use of chemical weapons, and if we don't, they're more likely to be used again. He assures us that the strike will be limited and that it will aid moderates fighting the regime. He warns that American credibility is at stake. The case is quite clear. It is simply not convincing. It's possible that an attack on Syria will convince Assad not to use chemical weapons in the future, but it is just as likely to convince him that being in for a penny, he might as well be in for a pound, and to unleash his entire chemical arsenal. It is just as likely that an American strike on Syria will produce a retaliatory strike, possibly by Hezbollah against Israel, requiring a retaliatory strike by Israel, possibly on Iran, in a catastrophic chain reaction. We don't know where it will lead, but we can be sure that the morning after the attack, we would confront a most uncomfortable irony. In retaliation for Assad killing Syrian civilians with chemical weapons, the United States will have killed Syrian civilians with conventional weapons, for civilian casualties are an unavoidable tragedy of war. Well, who would be our new allies in this war? Now, they'd be the Islamic forces that are responsible for their own litany of atrocities, including the massacre of Syrian Christians, the beheading of political opponents, summary executions of war prisoners, and acts of barbarity too depraved to be discussed in this forum. We would be aiding and abetting those forces. We're told that Al-Qaeda is not more than a fourth of our new coalition and that the rest are moderates. Well, we were told the same thing about Libya. We were told the same thing about the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. The problem with moderates in the Middle East is that there aren't very many of them, and they're quickly overwhelmed in any coalition they attempt. Nor can such an attack be limited in duration or scope. The fact is, once you have attacked another country, you are at war with that country and its allies, whatever you wish to call it and whatever you later decide to do. And wars have a very nasty way of taking turns that no one can predict or control. World War I began with a series of obscure incidents that quickly escalated into World War. And the Middle East today is a veritable powder keg compared to the antebellum Europe of a century ago. Finally, we're told American credibility is on the line. Well, chemical weapons are barbaric, but this isn't the first time they've been used in modern times. They were used previously in Syria, in the Yemeni civil war, by Iraq against Iran, by the Vietnamese against the Cambodians, by Libya against Chad. The only unique thing about this incident is that it is the first time an American president has declared their use to be a red line. Our credibility was harmed by foolish and reckless statement by the President. Let us not further damage it with a foolish and reckless act by Congress. Wars are not something to be taken lightly. From the podium right behind me, General MacArthur warned that in war there is no substitute for victory. If you're going to start a war, you'd better be prepared to put the entire resources of the country behind it, to endure every setback along the way, to utterly annihilate every vestige of the enemy, and to install by force a government of our design and choosing, and to maintain that government until all opposition is ceased. If you are not willing to do that, then you have no business firing the first shot. More than a decade of irresolute and aimless wars in Iraq and Afghanistan should have taught us this lesson, that victory and not stalemate must be the objective of any war. Yet this would be a war whose avowed objective is stalemate. That is self-defeating. It is immoral. The President has already made his case very clearly, and he is very clearly wrong. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Ohio, Ms. KAPTUR, for 5 minutes.
Madam Speaker, I'd like to thank President Obama for his considered judgment in the matter of Syria and for not headstrong rushing the United States to military action. I thank him for his consultations with members of Congress in both chambers, and for allowing the American people time to express their views. We must all weigh the consequences and repercussions of unilateral U.S. actions. As the world's greatest military power, we must employ our power wisely and only with good measure. I have every confidence that our U.S. military can perform any task to which they are ordered successfully, and we owe them our deepest respect and gratitude. I also want to thank and acknowledge the government of Russia for early reports we are learning about regarding discussions underway to rid Syria of weapons caches of danger both to Syria as well as our global community. Both Russia and the United States, as the world's premier nuclear powers, hold awesome responsibilities to move our world toward a more peaceful and stable posture. Surely, we must focus that effort on the very unstable set of states across the Middle East. Russia and our country both have suffered from terrorist attacks and well understand the consequences of unresolved conflict and terrorists preying on unstable states. My hope is that the Russian initiative gains momentum and let all nations of goodwill on our globe find a way forward to address the tragic consequences of the Syrian civil war, starting with greater humanitarian assistance to refugees that have flowed into adjoining nations like Jordan and Lebanon and Turkey, straining some of those nations' abilities to even hold their own internal affairs together. Surely, our world can better address the human suffering that is evident to anyone who's paying attention. Surely, surely, all reasonable world leaders can find a better way forward for Syria and for us all. Madam Speaker, I yield back my remaining time.
The gentlelady yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Poe, for 5 minutes.
Madam Speaker, the drums of war are beating by the president who, ironically, won the Nobel Peace Prize. The peace president wants to fire missiles into Syria because tyrant Assad is violating the rules of war by allegedly using chemical weapons. The president's goal is not to remove Assad, not to destroy the chemical weapons, but to send Assad a message. To be clear, there is no imminent national security threat or interest for the United States by us starting this war. And make no mistake, shooting rockets into another country is an act of war. War has consequences. What if the outlaw Assad chooses then to use chemical weapons again, or chooses to shoot back? He could retaliate against the United States, one of our embassies, the Navy that fired the rockets, or other U.S. military installations, or even specific troops, or retaliate against its neighbor Turkey or Israel using our aggression as an excuse. In any of these situations, this limited war escalates with more U.S. response, intervention, and involvement. Now, who are the players in this war that is taking place already? On one side, you have Syria, tyrant Assad, with the aid of Russia, with the aid of Iran, that news reports say has 10,000 Iranian troops in Syria, and Hezbollah. Hezbollah, as you remember, Madam Speaker, is a terrorist group. Then on the other side, you have the Free Syrian Army. You have patriots. You have mercenaries, paid soldiers from other countries. You have criminals that have come in to just pillage the land and using this as an opportunity. You also have al-Nusra, an al-Qaeda affiliate. You also have al-Qaeda from Iraq. Now, last time I recall,
The United States is already at war with al-Qaeda. They are the enemy of the United States. And it looks like now you've got a terrorist group, Hezbollah, on one side, a terrorist group, al-Qaeda, on the other side. And we want to get involved in this civil religious war to send a message not to use chemical weapons. And of course, you not only just have these players, you've got Turkey, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar lined up on the side of the Free Syrian Army. Turkey, next door neighbor to Syria. A year ago, a Turkish F-4 built by the United States was flying along the Syrian border and it was shot down. Don't know who shot it down. Meanwhile, the United States already has, with its NATO partners, Patriot batteries on the Syrian border facing Syria that are in Turkey. The Dutch, the Germans, and the Americans have manned those batteries. Why? To make sure that our NATO ally is protected from incoming rockets. We escalate this regional conflict in one country, it may escalate to other regions, like Turkey. Then we got real issues, because Turkey's a NATO ally. We are obligated to help them if they get into a war with Syria. And then about the terrorists. As I mentioned, they are on really both sides. And we hear from the administration, in all due respect, that it's the minority of the fighters on the rebel side that are al-Qaeda. I respectfully disagree with the Secretary of State. What seems to be happening is the Free Syrian Army is going through Syria, liberating Syrians, and al-Qaeda is in the background coming in and occupying the territory and imposing strict Islamic Sharia law. And we could see this play out, that if the rebels eventually are successful, then we may have a second civil war between the Free Syrian Army and al-Qaeda. All of that may be down the road. And why would the United States want to get involved in this situation? So today, Madam Speaker, I have filed a resolution stating that no U.S. funds will be used for this war with Syria. This religious civil war is not our war, so no money for the peace president's war. And if he starts a war with Syria, I suggest the president return the Nobel Peace Prize. And if he really wants to send a message, he should follow Samuel Goldwyn's advice, try Western Union. And that's just the way it is. I yield back.
The gentleman's time has expired. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. McGovern, for 5 minutes.
Madam Speaker, last week the United States Department of Agriculture released its annual report on food security in the United States. The report documents the levels of food security and insecurity in this country. In this report, USDA measured the amount of food available or unavailable to households and individuals. In other words, Madam Speaker, USDA measured the amount of hunger in the United States. It measured the ability of Americans to put food on their tables. The good news is that hunger isn't getting worse. The bad news is that there are still 49 million people living in our great country who are food insecure. 49 million people who don't know where their next meal will come from. 49 million people who are forced to choose between basic needs like rent, utilities, and food. 49 million people who don't have the resources necessary to make ends meet. 49 million people who are hungry. That's 1 out of every 6 people living in this country who are food insecure, a figure that hasn't changed since 2008. While it's a good thing that food insecurity isn't getting worse, that's simply not good enough. We must do more to ensure that healthy and nutritious food is available to everyone in America. We must ensure that 49 million people are not left behind when it comes to buying food. The fact remains that millions of Americans are still struggling to make ends meet. Millions of Americans continue to feel the effects of the worst economic recession since the Great Depression. As a result of the staggering loss of jobs and reduced wages that came from the recession, millions of Americans were forced to turn to the federal government's preeminent anti-hunger program, SNAP, formerly known as food stamps, in order to put food on their tables. SNAP participation rates skyrocketed precisely because of the recession. SNAP is a safety net. It's designed to increase in participation in times of need. That means the cost of the program goes up as more people need help buying food while they're either unemployed or struggling with lower wages. That's precisely what happened during the recession. And that's why there are so many people relying on SNAP today. These food insecurity numbers confirm that hunger is a problem in America, that there are millions of people, 49 million people, who don't know where their next meals are coming from and need help buying food for themselves and their families. This is a sobering report, Madam Speaker, one that would normally result in congressional hearings on the problem and possible ways to reduce hunger in America. But we're not living in normal times. That's because, Madam Speaker, even with the release of this report showing that rates of food insecurity are unchanged since the end of the Bush administration, this Republican-controlled House is preparing to consider a bill that would cut at least $40 billion from the SNAP program. That's right. The response to this report is to make hunger in America even worse than it is today. Now, I want to remind my colleagues there is not one single town, one single city or county or congressional district in America that is hunger-free. For the life of me, I can't understand why the Republicans want to cut this program that provides food to millions of Americans. I cannot understand why the Republican leadership wants to balance the budget on the backs of the working poor. SNAP is not only successful, it's efficient and effective. The error rate for SNAP is among the lowest, if not the lowest, error rates of any federal program. That's right. Fraud, waste, and abuse in SNAP is at an all-time low, which means that SNAP dollars are going exactly where they should be going, to feed hungry Americans. Now, on top of that, SNAP kept 4.7 million people out of poverty in 2011, including 2.1 million children. That means that cutting SNAP will also result in increased poverty in America. The irony is that there are some members of this House who are collecting millions of dollars in taxpayer-funded farm subsidies, while at the same time they vote to take away food from hungry Americans. Madam Speaker, hunger in America is real. It must be addressed. That's why I've called for a White House conference on food and nutrition, a conference where we can explore hunger and nutrition and develop a plan to end this scourge once and for all. We will not end hunger by cutting the most efficient and effective anti-hunger program in the country. We will not end hunger through arbitrary, harmful, and spiteful budget cuts. We can end hunger now if we decide to take that step. The USDA Food Security Report provides evidence that we're not doing enough to end hunger now. The upcoming vote to cut the anti-hunger safety net shows how truly heartless the Republican leadership is when it comes to the working poor in America. We can do more, we can do better, we can and we must end hunger now. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Thompson, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, on August 22nd, the United States Department of Health and Human Services Inspector General Daniel Levinson announced his decision to initiate an investigation into the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, aka Medicare, and it's Medicare's handling of the competitive bidding program for durable medical equipment, prosthetics, orthotics, and supplies. I initiated a request for the investigation on June 20th, 2013, following disclosures that CMS awarded contracts nationwide to suppliers that lacked the proper licensure and accreditation, clear violations of the agency's program guidelines for participation in the competitive bidding program. The so-called competitive bidding model is being used by the government to procure goods and services for our nation's seniors and those facing life-altering disease and disability. While CMS makes claims that competitive bidding program will increase market competition and lower costs, in practice it's shown to be anything but competitive. Over the past several years, we've seen the program negatively affect seniors and force small medical companies, many of them are local and the only entity capable of providing quality goods and a high-level service, out of the market, out of business. In 2011, more than 240 economists and market auction design experts wrote to President Obama concerning the flawed bidding model. The experts wrote that, quote, "The current program is the antithesis of science and contradicts all that is known about proper market design," end quote. These warnings have become reality over the past several years. The licensure and accreditation abuses are just the latest among a long list of program failures. For many of these reasons, on June 12, 2013, 227 bipartisan members of the House, a full majority, including 82 Democrats and 145 Republicans, sent a letter to CMS outlining the flaws and abuses in the program, requesting that the agency delay further implementation until such issues are fully addressed and fixed. Despite the growing number of reported abuses under the program and the strong congressional concern about the bidding design and a long overdue need for transparency and accountability, CMS moved forward with the program in 91 new bidding areas on July 1, 2013, bringing the total to 100 areas nationwide. Now, while CMS has admitted to the abuses, the agency has failed to detail how these failures occurred or offer a plan for corrective action. With any hope, the Office of Inspector General's efforts will shed light on how these failures occurred and impose a new level of transparency at the Medicare agency, CMS, and among the agency's administrators. In the meantime, it will be up to the House of Representatives to take corrective action. With this said, I respectfully request that each of my colleagues join me in co-sponsoring H.R. 1717, Medicare DME POS Market Pricing Program Act of 2013. Now, this common-sense measure, authored by my esteemed colleague from Georgia, Dr. Price, will apply real market principles to the highly flawed competitive bidding model. Mr. Speaker, we owe as much to our constituents, to the taxpayers, and our nation's Medicare beneficiaries. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time. Pursuant to Clause 12A of Rule 1, the Chair declares the House in recess until noon today.
The House is spending the morning on general speeches. They'll be back at noon Eastern for legislative work. They have 8 bills on the agenda, including a number dealing with federal land issues and one on setting up licensing for insurance brokers to sell policies across state lines. First round of votes expected to be about 2 Eastern, with votes to be completed by 5 Eastern. Members will be wrapping up relatively early today, as the President will be speaking tonight on his request for congressional authorization to use military force against Syria for last month's chemical attacks that killed more than 1,400 civilians. The Senate today spending the day debating whether to be